I was in the middle of prepping a deposition when the envelope slid under my office door. No name, no return address, just my name typed in block letters, Lila Carson. I thought it was a prank, maybe a client, maybe opposing counsel playing games, but the moment I opened it, I knew. Inside was a single sheet of hospital stationery. Walter Carson, age 67, admitted for heart failure. Critical condition. Family contact advised, family. That word still makes my stomach tighten. It's been 23 years since I last saw my father. 23 years since the day he and my mother left me at a train station in the middle of nowhere, laughing as they drove off and shouted, "Let's see how she finds her way home." I was 11. They called it a lesson in independence. The lesson I learned was that I was disposable. I don't talk about it much. Most people don't know. To them, I'm just Lila, the sharp-tongued lawyer in Boston who wins impossible child advocacy cases and doesn't take nonsense from anyone. They don't know that I spent 2 years in a temporary group home, that I aged out of the system without a single adult saying goodbye, that I've been building my life from scratch since I was a kid. But now, this letter, after all this time, why now? Why him? Why me? Before I tell you how I ended up at that train station, what happened after, and what I plan to do now that the man who left me there is dying, I need to take you back to that summer, to that vacation I thought we were going on, and to the moment I realized I was utterly, heartbreakingly alone. I still remember the heat that day. It was early August, and Massachusetts was trapped in one of those suffocating summer stretches where even the pavement seemed to radiate hostility. I had just turned 11 2 weeks earlier, and for the first time in years, my parents were promising something close to a family vacation. They didn't use the word vacation, of course. They called it a bonding trip, said we needed to get out of the house and reset as a family. I didn't know what that meant, but I was so desperate for something, anything that felt normal, I didn't question it. Packlight, my dad, Walter, had said, tossing an old duffel bag at me. "We're not staying long, just one night out of town." I didn't ask where we were going. I was used to not knowing things in my house. Questions were seen as challenges. Curiosity was backtalk. My role was to follow, not to ask. Still, I remember hoping pathetically that maybe we were going to the lake, or to visit some distant cousins. I even imagined a motel with a pool. That night, I laid my clothes out carefully on the bed shorts, a blue t-shirt with peeling glitter stars, a thin hoodie, and the canvas sneakers I'd outgrown but still wore because no one had taken me shopping in a year. We left at 6 a.m. sharp the next morning. My mom didn't even look at me as I got in the back seat. She was dressed too nicely for a road trip lipstick, perfume, and heels that made no sense for hiking or camping. I remember thinking that was strange. Dad drove. Country music played low on the radio. For the first 30 minutes, no one spoke. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional rustle of paper as Mom flipped through a magazine. "Excited?" Dad asked finally, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I nodded quickly, unsure if there was a correct answer. "Good," he said with a smirk. "Because today's gonna be important." That sentence stuck with me, even though I didn't yet understand what he meant. Important how for whom we drove west past Worcester, past Springfield until even the roads started to thin out. Signs became less familiar. Bennington. One said, Rutland. Another. We were in Vermont before I realized we'd crossed state lines. It was almost noon when we pulled into the station. I had never seen it before, a squat red brick train depot with cracked windows and a parking lot filled with dust and broken pavement. There were only 2 tracks. No cafe, no vending machines, just a ticket booth with a bored attendant and a rusty bench under a warped awning. "This is it," my father said, throwing the car into park. "This is what I asked cautiously." Mom turned to me from the front seat with a tight smile. We want to see how well you've been paying attention. Excuse me, you're a smart girl, Dad said. Always talking about how you read maps and love solving puzzles. So here's one. My stomach dropped. What do you mean we're going to leave you here for a little while? He said, almost casually. See if you can find your way home. I blinked at him. I thought he was joking. What kind of parents would say something like that? I don't have a phone, I said quickly, my voice rising. I don't know how to buy a ticket. I don't even know where we are. You'll figure it out, Mom said coolly. Think of it as a challenge. Panic started rising in my chest. No, please. I don't want to do this. I don't even have money. Dad reached into his pocket and handed me a $5 bill. That's all you'll need if you're resourceful. Resourceful. I didn't know what that meant at 11, but I knew what it felt like to be discarded. Wait, I shouted as they got out of the car. You can't leave me here, but they didn't even turn around. They got back in the car after walking me to the bench and telling the ticket clerk I was waiting for someone, then they drove off. Just like that. No hug, no instructions, no plan. Just laughter through the open window as the car pulled away. I'll never forget my father's voice calling back, "Let's see how she finds her way home." The words burned themselves into my brain. At first, I sat frozen on the bench, clutching the $5 like it might transform into something more useful. A phone, a parent, a way out. But nothing happened. Time passed 15 minutes, 30, then an hour. The station attendant gave me a suspicious glance now and then, but didn't approach me. A family with 2 kids walked by and looked at me like I was a stray. I started crying, not loudly, just silent tears rolling down my cheeks. I wiped them quickly, ashamed. I didn't want to be seen as weak, even though I felt like I was unraveling. Eventually, the ticket clerk came out of his booth. "You waiting for someone, sweetheart?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "My dad?" I lied. "He's just parking the car." The man looked at the nearly empty lot, then back at me. Uh-huh. He didn't press further, just went back to his window. By 2 p.m., I was shaking from hunger. I hadn't eaten since morning, and the $5 wouldn't even cover a snack from the only nearby shop, a dusty little general store where the cashier looked at me like I was about to steal something. At 3:30, I gave up pretending. I walked back to the station attendant and blurted out the truth. "My parents left me here," I said, voice barely audible. "They said I should find my way home. But I don't know how. I don't even know where I am." That moment changed everything. The man's expression hardened, and he immediately called someone on a landline behind the glass. I don't remember exactly what he said, but within 15 minutes, a police officer arrived. She was tall, with a square jaw and a gentle voice. She crouched down to my level and asked if I knew my address. I nodded, at least that I still remembered. She offered me a juice box, which I drank in seconds. Then she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You're safe now. You're not alone." I didn't believe her, but I wanted to. The ride to the station was quiet. I sat in the back of the police cruiser, still clutching the empty juice box like it was some kind of totem. My body felt like it was operating on a 5-second delay, everything fuzzy and slow. The seatbelt cut across my chest, but I didn't adjust it. I didn't speak. I didn't ask where we were going. The officer, whose name was Officer Daniels, tried to fill the silence. "My name's Camille," she said gently. "I have a daughter about your age. 11. Right?" I nodded. "She loves unicorns and hates math. I stared out the window. It wasn't that I didn't want to answer. It was that I didn't know how. Talking felt like a risk, like I'd start speaking and the entire story would come tumbling out, ugly and uncontainable. And if I started crying again, I didn't think I'd be able to stop. "Okay," Officer Daniels said quietly. "We're just going to get you checked in. Somewhere safe. You don't have to say anything until you're ready. The place we pulled into wasn't a police station. It looked more like an old house with a government sign out front, Vermont Department for Children and Families, temporary intake unit. Inside, it smelled like bleach and peanut butter. A woman with a clipboard met us at the door and ushered me into a side room with mismatched chairs and faded posters on the wall. You're not alone. Speak up, your voice matters. You deserve safety. I didn't believe any of it. They offered me a peanut butter sandwich and a small bag of pretzels. I ate slowly, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. The woman's name was Marcy, and she had kind eyes but a clipped tone, like someone who's done this too many times to sugarcoat it. She asked me questions gently, then less gently when I didn't answer. My name, my birthday, my address, my school. If I remembered my parents' phone number, I answered what I could. And then came the question I didn't know how to answer. Have your parents ever done something like this before? I hesitated. Technically, no. Not like this. Not this exact thing. But the way she asked it, it opened a door. They leave me a lot, I mumbled. Sometimes at home, sometimes in the car. One time they left me in a parking lot because I forgot to lock the back door. Marcy paused, her pen hovering. How long were you alone? An hour. Maybe more. They came back eventually. She didn't write that down. She just looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. You didn't deserve that, she said. I didn't reply. They kept me there for the rest of the day, watching me, asking more questions, occasionally stepping outside the room to speak in low voices I wasn't supposed to hear. Words like abandonment, DCF custody, and no return contact floated through the air like smoke. By nightfall, it was official. I was a ward of the state. That's what they called it. It didn't feel official. It felt like I'd slipped through the floorboards of the world and landed somewhere cold and bureaucratic and full of strangers who kept calling me sweetie without knowing anything about me. That first night, I was driven to a temporary placement home, Greenwood Transitional Center, a group home for girls between the ages of 7 and 13. I didn't know it yet, but it would be the place I called home for the next year and a half. The building looked like an old summer camp. 2 wings, each with narrow twin beds and lockers at the foot. Cinder block walls painted light yellow in a way that made everything feel more like a hospital than a home. There were 6 girls already there when I arrived. Most of them ignored me. A few stared like I was a new animal in the zoo. A staff member named Joy gave me a tour and handed me a small canvas bag with donated clothes, a toothbrush, a set of socks, and underwear that didn't fit. Then she showed me to bed 4, tucked into the corner of Wing A, and left me with a goodnight kiddo. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft snoring of the other girls and the distant sound of someone laughing down the hallway. It wasn't the laughter that bothered me. It was that it reminded me of my father, that same laughing voice, calling from the car. Let's see how she finds her way home. He had laughed while leaving me. Who laughs at that by the end of the week? I'd been assigned a caseworker. Ms. Irene Cho, a small Korean-American woman with steel gray hair and surprisingly warm hands. She brought coloring books to our meetings and always let me pick the snacks from the vending machine downstairs before we talked. But she also didn't let me avoid things. Lila, she said once, when I refused to speak for an entire hour. Not talking is a choice, and you've been forced into enough things you didn't choose. That got to me. I started talking. Slowly. Not about everything, but enough. Enough for her to start piecing together the picture of a girl who'd been emotionally neglected for most of her life and was now trying to survive in a world that suddenly wanted to help her too late. There were court dates. I wasn't allowed to attend the first one. But Ms. Cho told me afterward my parents hadn't shown up. They didn't even call, she said, voice full of quiet rage. Another hearing came and went. Still no contact. Eventually, the state declared that my parents had relinquished their rights through non-participation. The judge's gavel hit the block, and just like that on paper, I was no longer their child. But I didn't feel free. I felt erased. A child of no one. That year was the loneliest of my life. Greenwood wasn't cruel, but it wasn't home. The staff rotated too often to form real bonds. The other girls came and went, some angry, some broken, some numb. We weren't sisters. We were survivors orbiting each other. Unsure whether to reach out or retreat, I didn't trust anyone. Not yet. But I had a sketch pad. Ms. Cho brought it to me one afternoon, along with a set of colored pencils and a card that said, "When words don't work, let your hands talk." I drew for hours that night. At first, it was just lines, angry, slashing strokes of red and black. Then came shapes boxes, windows, faces without eyes. Eventually, those shapes turned into something resembling people, stories, places I wished I could run to. That's when I began to feel something shift. Not hope, not yet, but control in that sketchbook. No one could leave me behind. By the time I turned 12, I had learned how to disappear in plain sight. At Greenwood, that was a skill worth having. You didn't want to stand out. Too much attention could turn cruel fast, and girls who asked for too much ended up disappointed or punished. But if you were too invisible, you faded into the system like a misplaced file. So I balanced, I kept my head down, followed the rules, and kept my rage neatly tucked away in my drawings. Ms. Cho noticed. "Of course, you're very quiet lately," she said during one of our weekly check-ins. "I'm just tired," I answered. She nodded. "Tired is fair. But don't forget your voice still matters, even when it's quiet." I didn't tell her that I didn't believe that anymore. Maybe I never had, but I liked that she said it anyway. One morning in early spring, Joy, the same staff member who'd handed me my first bag of donated clothes, asked if I wanted to help reorganize the supply closet. I said yes, mostly because it meant getting out of PE. That closet smelled like dust and hand sanitizer, and inside were bins full of half-used markers, broken binders, and mismatched socks. I sorted while Joy sat cross-legged on the floor beside me, folding towels. "You've got good hands," she said. Precise, deliberate. It caught me off guard. "What when you move things?" she said, smiling. "You're careful with them, even the broken stuff. You don't just shove it aside like most kids." No one had ever said that to me before. No one had noticed the way I treated small, forgotten things. "You thinking about your permanency plan yet?" she asked casually. The question made my stomach knot. Most kids at Greenwood either got reunified with their birth families, placed with relatives, or sent to long-term foster families. That last one was what they called permanency, as if a stranger's house could suddenly become permanent just because a caseworker filed the right paperwork. I didn't know which one I feared more, going back to people who left me, or being handed to someone new. Again. "Not really," I said. "Well," Joy said, standing and stretching, "just remember, permanency doesn't mean forever. It just means safer than now." That night, I thought about that line, safer than now, and whether such a thing actually existed for someone like me, someone who'd been taught that love could leave at any moment, that safety was just another lie wrapped in laughter. Around that time, I started keeping a list in my sketchbook. I titled it Things I Can Control. It was short: the order I made my bed, which color pencil I used first, whether or not I talked back, what stories I told myself about my life. Sometimes I added new items, sometimes I crossed things out. But just making the list made the world feel a little less chaotic, a little more mine. At school, I stayed under the radar. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't bullied either. Bullied. I was the foster kid, Sure, but not the kind that caused trouble. I did my work, kept to myself, and never invited anyone over. Teachers liked me for my silence. Other students pitied me just enough to leave me alone. Then came Ms. Alder, my 7th grade English teacher. She was short, with wild gray hair and a voice that never dipped below dramatic reading. One afternoon, she assigned us a personal narrative project. Write about something that shaped you, she instructed. Something that made you who you are. I panicked. Write about that. About them. About that station I considered lying. I considered skipping school. I even considered plagiarizing something from the internet. But that night, I opened my sketchbook instead. And I drew the train station. Every brick, every track. The bench I sat on for hours. My parents' car disappearing into the horizon. I added words in the margins, fragments of memory he laughed when he left me. The map didn't show how to come back. Is it abandonment if no one wants you in the first place? When I handed in the drawing instead of an essay, I expected detention. Instead, Ms. Alder called me in after class. "This isn't what I asked for," she said, holding the sketchbook carefully, "but it's what I needed to see." She didn't ask for more details. She didn't press. But the next week, she handed me a flyer for an art summer camp scholarship. "I think you have something to say," she said. "Maybe drawing is how you say it." It was the first time anyone treated my art as something more than a distraction. That summer, I went to camp for 2 weeks. It was the first time I left Greenwood for something other than a court date or a doctor's appointment. The cabins were old, and the lake was full of algae, but I didn't care. For the first time, I met other kids who liked art, who didn't ask me about my past, who just saw what I created and said, "Whoa, that's good." I came back with confidence I hadn't known I was allowed to have. By the time I turned 13, Ms. Cho began bringing up long-term placement again. The family court had officially terminated my birth parents' rights, and the judge declared that reunification was no longer on the table. "You have the right to choose," she said gently. "You can stay at Greenwood until another home becomes available, or we can start the matching process now." I looked at her blankly. Matching families who want to foster long-term. Some may be open to adoption, others may not. But they'd be yours. Not staff, not shift workers. Just one home. The idea terrified me, but staying scared me more. "I'll try," I whispered. She smiled. "That's all we ask." Over the next few months, I met 3 different families. The first were too cheerful. The second seemed like they wanted a project. The third, well, they looked at me like I was broken glass, smiling on the surface, but flinching at every sharp edge. None of them felt real. So I stayed. I stayed at Greenwood through my 13th birthday, and my 14th, and even into my 15th. But somewhere in that time, I started building something else. Not just safety, a foundation. I joined the art club at school. I volunteered to tutor younger girls in reading. I applied for every scholarship Ms. Cho put in front of me. I worked in the library 2 afternoons a week. I told the truth in small doses to teachers, to counselors, to myself. And I began to dream. Not of being rescued, not of a magical family, but of becoming someone who could help kids like me who could walk into a courtroom one day and say, "No, this isn't okay, she deserves better." That's when the idea of law school took root. It wasn't about rules, it was about voice. And I had one now. By 16, I had developed a kind of emotional radar. I could walk into a room and know within seconds who was safe, who was pretending, and who would ask questions I didn't want to answer. That skill didn't come from therapy or intuition, it came from years of navigating systems designed to keep kids like me quiet and compliant. But I wasn't quiet anymore. Not at school, not in court hearings, and definitely not on paper. Writing had joined art as another outlet, another voice I didn't have to raise to be heard. I wrote essays that burned, stories that bent reality to make sense of my own, and poetry that no one saw but me. And then I began writing letters, not to people, but to systems. Letters to judges, to caseworkers, to advocacy boards. At first, they were just practice assignments, Ms. Alder gave me in a civics elective she practically invented for me. But then one of my letters got published in the Regional Youth Justice Bulletin. I wrote about what it meant to be invisible and observed at the same time. I wrote about being passed between adults who never learned my name, who made decisions based on files instead of conversations, who used the phrase emotionally stable like a badge, but never asked what stability actually meant to a child who had none. I signed it L.C. 16 Greenwood Transitional. It wasn't anonymous, but it also wasn't me. Not entirely. Not yet. After it was published, something changed. I started getting visits, real ones, from child welfare reform advocates. One of them, Cassandra Ward, was a former foster youth turned attorney. She came to speak at our school, and afterward, she found me. "You wrote that piece in the bulletin, right?" she asked. I nodded, stunned. It was devastating. And necessary. I didn't know what to say. Compliments made me uneasy. Praise felt like a trick. "I'm hosting a summer program," she continued, "for teens interested in law, policy, and justice. You should apply." The application was long, personal. It asked me to explain why I wanted to participate. I stared at the prompt for hours. "Why do you want to learn about child welfare law?" I wrote. "Because the system taught me to stay quiet. And now I want to learn how to change it." 2 weeks later, I was accepted. The program was held at a university in Boston, my first time away from Greenwood without a chaperone. Cassandra arranged a host family, a stipend, and a train ticket. I was terrified. I was also ready. I remember the first day vividly. 20 students, all from different states, sat around a long conference table with notebooks, laptops, and guarded expressions. Some were foster kids. Others had experienced juvenile detention, homelessness, or worse. But we all carried stories that didn't fit in yearbooks or on social media. The program wasn't just about reading case law. It was about reclaiming narrative. We learned how laws were written and how they were weaponized. We read court rulings that decided the fate of children in 3 paragraphs. We examined the difference between neglect and poverty, between discipline and abuse, between parental rights and child safety. And we debated. I loved it. I argued. I cited. I stood my ground. For the first time, adults weren't telling me how I felt. They were asking what I thought. One night during the second week, Cassandra invited me to dinner. We sat at a small Thai place near the campus. I picked nervously at my pad thai while she asked about my experience so far. "It's amazing," I said honestly, "but it also feels like too much." "Too much how? Like I don't belong here. Like I'm an imposter." She put down her fork and looked at me. "Lila," she said, "you belong here more than most people. Not because you survived, but because you see things most people miss. You notice what the law erases." I didn't cry then, but I wanted to. Because no one had ever said that before, not that I was strong, not that I was brave, but that I saw things clearly. That was the summer I started to believe that I could build something, not just for myself, but for others like me. Kids still in group homes. Kids who hadn't been lucky enough to get fostered. Kids who were just surviving in silence. Thinking no one cared, that fall, I applied to every scholarship I could find. Ms. Cho was still in my life, my independent living coordinator by then. She reviewed my essays, wrote recommendation letters, and sat beside me as I submitted FAFSA forms and transcripts. We both knew I wasn't going to have parental help. That year, Greenwood held a small graduation ceremony for me and 2 other girls. I wore a borrowed cap and gown. They gave us donated gift bags and cupcakes. The director read off our names like it was a real commencement. When they said, Lila Carson accepted to Boston University pre-law, the room erupted. I had done it. I had made it out, not by being rescued, but by refusing to disappear. And yet, even in that moment, a small ache bloomed in my chest. A whisper, they should have been here. My parents. Not because I wanted them, but because I had beaten the version of myself they left behind. They should have seen what they lost. But maybe that was the point. College was a whirlwind. Boston was loud and unpredictable and full of people who didn't know me, didn't know I'd spent half my childhood in a group home. I could be anyone. I chose to be focused. My first year, I barely left the dorms except for class and work. I got a job shelving books at the law library. I spent nights reading textbooks until my eyes burned. I had one photo on my desk, a picture of me at the summer law program, standing beside Cassandra, both of us smiling like we hadn't been through hell to get there. I didn't party. I didn't date. I didn't trust yet, but I thrived. By sophomore year, I declared my major legal studies with a focus on child advocacy. Every time I told someone that, I watched their reaction. Most nodded politely. Some asked questions, but a few flinched, like they'd seen something in my eyes they couldn't quite name. And maybe they had, because I wasn't just a student. I was a girl who'd once been left behind at a train station with $5 and a lie. I wasn't trying to forget that. I was turning it into power. Graduating from Boston University felt like stepping onto solid ground for the first time. I walked across the stage in a red robe that didn't quite fit, gripping a diploma that carried more weight than anyone around me could have imagined. My name was called Lila Carson Magna Cum Laude, Legal Studies. The crowd clapped politely. There was no cheering section, no balloons or flowers, no mother crying in the third row or father giving a proud thumbs up from the aisle. Just me. And that was okay, because I had built something they couldn't touch. After graduation, I applied to Northeastern Law School, drawn by its public interest law program. My application essay wasn't subtle. I wrote about the child welfare system, about what it means to be parentless in a world that romanticizes family. I wrote about the difference between being safe and simply being forgotten. I didn't write about the train station. I didn't have to. I was accepted with a full scholarship. My classmates were a blur of privilege and potential. Some were brilliant, others were arrogant, but most had parents helping with tuition, housing, or connections. I had a single suitcase, a public library card, and a stubborn refusal to quit. The coursework was brutal. I loved it. I interned with legal aid nonprofits, shadowed family court hearings, wrote policy memos no one read yet. And slowly, I built a network, not of blood but of belief. Belief in better. Belief that the system, however broken, could be bent toward justice if the right people pushed hard enough. By the time I graduated, I knew where I was headed. I joined Cassandra Ward's firm, now rebranded as Ward and Hale Child Advocacy Law Group, and stepped into my first official case representing a 14-year-old girl whose guardians had dropped her off at a fire station with nothing but a bag of clothes and a forged medical file. The case made local headlines. The guardians claimed they had done what was best for the child, citing behavioral issues. I stood before the judge and argued, calmly but firmly, that what they had done wasn't just abandonment, it was negligence. It was cowardice wrapped in condescension. We won. The girl was placed with a vetted foster family she had met during counseling, and I visited her months later to find her learning to skateboard in the driveway with her new dad cheering her on. "Thank you," she said, not looking up from her helmet. I didn't answer. My voice had caught in my throat, because for one aching second, I saw myself in her in that helmet, in those new sneakers, in that hesitant smile, the girl who didn't get to have that. but it helped make it possible for someone else. That was the point. That was enough. For a while, it was a rainy Tuesday when the letter arrived. At first, I thought it was junk, another envelope with a fake handwritten font and a nonprofit stamp. But something made me pause. The return address was a nursing facility in Rutland, Vermont. Rutland? My fingers froze. It couldn't be. I opened it with mechanical care. Inside was a single typed note, patient Walter Carson. Current condition, congestive heart failure. Stage 4. Facility Green Meadow Long-Term Care. Status terminal. Patient has requested contact with next of kin. You were listed as emergency contact in absence of any other family. There was no signature, no warmth, just data. And the sound of a door creaking open in my chest that I had sealed shut long ago. Walter Carson. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in over a decade. I didn't even know where he was, whether he was still alive, whether he had remarried or vanished into some beer-stained corner of nowhere. And now he was dying. And somehow, they had found me. I stared at the letter until the words blurred. For years, I had trained myself to respond to emergencies with calm calculation. But this wasn't a client. This wasn't a hearing or a case file. This was him. The man who left me on a train platform at 11 years old with $5 and a cruel laugh. The man who had never called, never apologized, never shown up to court. And now he wanted, what forgiveness closure? Permission to die with a clean conscience. I placed the letter on my kitchen counter and stared at it for 3 hours. When I finally moved, I didn't pick up the phone. I opened my laptop and wrote, "To Cassandra Ward. Subject need advice personal." Cassandra called me before I could hit send. "How long have you had the letter?" she asked after I explained. "Since this morning?" "And how long have you been shaking? I hadn't realized I was—" "This isn't a case," she said gently. "This is trauma, coming back dressed as opportunity." I said nothing. "You don't owe him anything. Lila, not your time, not your compassion, not your silence. I know. But if you want to go, if you need something from that visit, I'll support you. And I'll go with you." I swallowed hard. "I don't think I want to forgive him." "You don't have to. I don't even want answers. I don't want him to think I'm still the child he left behind." That was the truth. I didn't want a reunion. I didn't want a moment of shared tears and redemption. I wanted witness. I wanted him to see the woman I had become in spite of him. And I wanted to see if there was even a fragment of humanity left in the man who had once treated his daughter's abandonment as a joke. Cassandra said something I'd never forget. Sometimes healing isn't a circle. It's a line you walk away on. 2 days later, I bought a train ticket to Rutland. Same route, same direction, same girl. But this time, I wasn't being left behind. This time, I was choosing. I hadn't been to Vermont in almost 20 years. The last time, I was an 11-year-old girl with sunburned arms, a fraying backpack, and 5 crumpled dollars in my pocket. I remember the color of the sky that day, too blue, too cheerful. I remember the sound of tires pulling away from cracked pavement, and I remember silence. The silence after my parents vanished, the silence of not being chosen. Now, the air felt different, thinner, more solemn. The sky was gray. My reflection in the train window showed a woman with steady eyes and a jaw set so tightly it ached. I had packed light legal pads, my ID, a small overnight bag, nothing sentimental. No photos, no reminders. I wasn't here for a visit. I was here for a reckoning. The nursing facility sat just outside Rutland, nestled among pine trees like something meant to be forgotten. The paint peeled from the eaves, and the sliding glass doors stuck on their tracks. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. A receptionist behind a plastic shield asked for my name, then pointed to the second floor. "He's in room 214, she said. "He's expecting you, expecting me, like this was normal, Like we were family. I rode the elevator in silence, heart beating loud enough to fill the small space. When the doors opened, I saw him immediately through the half-open door of his room, slouched in a reclining bed, tubes in his nose, the unmistakable pallor of dying clinging to his skin. He didn't look like the man in my memory. Walter Carson had aged. His frame was thinner, his face hollow, his arms spotted and weak. The loud, brash man who once barked orders and slammed doors was now a husk, tethered to machines, diminished. He turned when he heard the footsteps. His eyes squinted, and for a moment, they didn't register. Then recognition dawned. "Jennifer," he rasped. My spine stiffened. "It's Lila." He swallowed hard. "Of course, Lila." I stepped into the room but stayed near the door. A nurse offered to get me a chair, but I shook my head. I didn't want to sit. "You came," he said after a long pause. "I did. Didn't think you would." "Neither did I said flatly. The silence that followed was not the kind I had known as a child. It was heavy, electric, waiting to split. He gestured to a small chair beside his bed. "Please." I hesitated, then sat barely touching the cushion. There was no script for this. What do you say to the man who left you behind on purpose? What do you say to a father who laughed while abandoning you? Why, now I asked. He blinked slowly, as if the question took effort to comprehend. "Because I'm dying," he said. "And I didn't want to go without seeing you. You had 23 years to look for me. I didn't think you'd want to be found." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "So you decided it was better to do nothing. I didn't know how to fix it," he said. "And your mother? She don't blame her." I cut in. "She may have driven away with you, but you were the one who handed me $5 and said, 'Let's see how she finds her way home.' That was you." He didn't deny it. Instead, he coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that reminded me how fragile he'd become. "I remember." He whispered, "I've never forgotten." "Did you think about me at all every day?" I wanted to believe him. I wanted it to be true. But he'd never called. Never written, never showed up to the hearings, never asked Ms. Cho how I was doing. "You say you thought about me," I said quietly. "But you did nothing. Not one act to show that I mattered. Not after you left me. Not when you lost custody. Not when I was testifying alone at 13 years old." He looked like he wanted to speak but had no words. Why, I asked, why did you do it? What could possibly justify abandoning your daughter in a place she didn't know and then vanishing for 2 decades? He looked away, shame crawling over his face. "I thought I was teaching you something," he murmured. "We thought your mother and we thought you needed to be tougher. You were always so sensitive." "I was 11, I said through clenched teeth. "Sensitive is normal. What you did wasn't a lesson, it was cruelty. I know that now." "Too late," I snapped. "You don't get to break a child and then apologize when it's convenient." He let that land. "I deserve your anger," he admitted. "That's not what I'm here to give you." He blinked. "Then why are you here?" I inhaled deeply, grounding myself. "To tell you that I survived?" That made him look at me. Really look. His eyes, dulled by illness, sharpened slightly. "I became a lawyer," I continued. "I fight for kids who get left behind, who grow up in group homes like I did, who get told they're too much or not enough or inconvenient. I built a life you weren't part of. I read something about you," he said. "A case. You were in the paper." I nodded. "So proud of you," he murmured. "Don't," I said immediately. "You don't get to be proud. You didn't raise me? You didn't earn that." He nodded, accepting it. "Fair." We sat in silence again. The machines beeped softly behind him. The oxygen hissed. Finally, I said, "I'm not here for you. I came for me. To look you in the eyes and make sure you understood that you didn't win." His brow furrowed. "You tried to break me, whether you'll admit it or not. And you might have succeeded if it weren't for strangers who did the bare minimum of caring." I was terrified. Alone. And I still found my way back. Not to you, to myself. His eyes brimmed with tears. "I didn't care. I don't forgive you." I said, "I'm not interested in reconciliation or redemption. I came because I needed to see you one last time before I closed that chapter forever." A single tear slid down his cheek. "Is there anything else you want to say?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Then I wish I'd been someone else. Someone better. I wasn't ready to be a father, and you paid the price." "No," I corrected. "You made a choice. You were ready enough to pack sandwiches, drive me 3 hours, and walk away. That's not confusion. That's intention." He flinched. "Your legacy in my life ends here," I said, standing. "Please." He rasped. "Stay. Just a little longer." I shook my head. "I gave you what I came to give." His voice cracked as I turned toward the door. "I never stopped loving you. I stopped." For the briefest second, I let the words hang. Then I said, without turning back, "You don't abandon people you love." And I walked out. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't cry in the lobby or the parking lot or on the train ride back to Boston. But when I stepped into my apartment that night, Scout, my rescue dog with the crooked tail and mismatched ears, greeted me with his usual enthusiasm. And something in me broke. I sat on the floor, sobbing into his fur. Not because I regretted going, not because I wanted things to be different, but because I had carried that wound for so long, and now that I had spoken the truth out loud, it finally began to close. Brian came home an hour later and sat beside me without asking anything, just wrapped an arm around my shoulder and waited. Eventually, I whispered, "It's done." He nodded. "You sure?" "Yes." And a week later, I received a call from the nursing home. Walter had passed in the night, and no funeral arrangements were made, no obituary, no requests, just a note, "Belongings unclaimed." I didn't go back. I didn't claim a thing, because I already had everything I needed: my name, my work, my voice, and none of it had come from him. For days after Walter Carson died, I expected to feel something more than what I did. Grief, relief, closure, anger, anything. But what I felt was light. Not joyful, not triumphant. Just lighter. Like I'd finally put down a heavy backpack I didn't realize I'd been carrying since I was a child. I didn't tell many people he had died. Cassandra knew. Of course. So did Brian. I didn't write about it in my journal. Didn't post a cryptic quote online. Didn't return the call from the social worker who left me a message saying they'd box up his remaining belongings just in case I wanted them. I didn't let someone else deal with the remnants of that life. I had no interest in scavenging the ruins of a man who had once looked me in the face and called abandonment a lesson. Still, my mind couldn't help wandering back to that hospital room, how small he looked, how thin his voice had become, how desperate he was to be seen in the final hours. I didn't hate him anymore, but I didn't pity him either. What I felt was distance, not emotional coldness, but clarity. Like watching the ending of a movie I no longer needed to understand because I already knew how it would end. That weekend, I sat across from Dr. Lana Wu, my therapist of 5 years, in her quiet office filled with soft lighting and overwatered plants. She knew the whole story: the train station, the group home, the years of silence. She had walked me through every jagged edge of it. "Tell me why you went," she said gently. "I think I wanted to reclaim something," I said, "not from him, but from myself." "What did you take back? My voice, my name, my narrative?" She smiled. "Sounds like power?" I nodded. And I didn't even realize how much of it I'd given away by not confronting it sooner. Did confronting him give you what you hoped for? No, I said honestly. But it gave me what I needed. I told her how I had walked out of the hospital feeling the kind of peace that doesn't come from forgiveness but from truth. How I had finally stopped wondering what kind of father he could have been, because the answer had already been written 2 decades ago. He was the kind of father who left, and I was the kind of daughter who survived. A few days later, I received an invitation to speak at a statewide child advocacy conference in Boston. I'd been recommended by Cassandra and another nonprofit director I'd worked with on policy reform. The keynote slot, Saturday evening. I almost said no. Standing on a stage with a microphone wasn't exactly my comfort zone. I preferred legal briefs and courtroom logic, not applause and emotional vulnerability. But something told me this was the next step. Not for them, for me. I sat at my desk the night before the event, the blank page open in front of me, hands hovering over the keyboard. What would I say? What could I say to an audience of caseworkers, attorneys, foster parents, and policymakers? And then the words came quietly, slowly, but insistently. The next night, I stood under the stage lights, heart thudding, breath measured. I looked out at the audience. Some had clipboards, some had tear-filled eyes, some sat with arms crossed, skeptics waiting to be convinced. And I spoke. My name is Lila Carson. I'm a child advocacy attorney. But before that, I was just another name in a file. Just another kid who fell through the cracks even though I was never invisible. I was just inconvenient. I told them about the train station, about being 11, about the silence that followed, about the girls I grew up with at Greenwood who never got out. And then I told them about the case I just closed, the one where a girl found a real home because someone finally stopped assuming she was the problem. I'm not standing here tonight because I'm exceptional, I said. I'm standing here because I was lucky. And because, once in a while, the system worked just enough to keep me alive. What I want is a world where that's not rare. When I finished, the room was quiet for half a second, then erupted into applause. But it wasn't the clapping that moved me. It was what happened afterward. A woman came up to me with a trembling voice and said, I was that girl too, only no one ever came for me. A man in his 60s shook my hand and whispered, Thank you. My granddaughter is in care right now. You gave me hope. Another teenager slipped me a note that simply read, You told my story, and now I want to tell mine. That night, walking home, I didn't feel lighter. I felt grounded, rooted in something far stronger than any apology my father could have ever offered. I was living proof that the story doesn't have to end at abandonment. It can begin again with purpose. In the weeks that followed, I received more invitations to speak. I turned most of them down. I wasn't looking to become an influencer. But I did say yes to one, a high school event in Worcester where students in foster care were preparing for life after graduation. I told them not to wait for permission to become who they wanted to be. I told them that the people who failed them didn't get to define them. I told them that healing isn't neat or linear, but that it's possible. And it's worth the fight. Afterward, a girl with braids and oversized glasses asked, Do you ever still feel like that kid at the train station? I thought about it for a moment, then smiled softly. Sometimes, I said, but more often, I feel like the woman who walked away from it. That fall, I launched a small legal initiative with Cassandra's help. We called it the Compass Project, a legal and mentorship program for foster teens aging out of the system. It offered them legal aid, housing referrals, job support, and someone to call when paperwork or fear threatened to swallow them whole. I didn't want to be anyone's savior. I just wanted to be what I never had, an anchor in the storm. And slowly, as the project grew, so did my peace. I stopped having nightmares about the train station. I stopped checking for his name online. I stopped waiting for a version of my mother to appear and beg for redemption. I gave up on fairy tale reconciliations, and I gained something far more powerful: boundaries, voice, freedom. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old file drawer, I found the sketchbook Ms. Cho had given me back at Greenwood. I hadn't seen it in years. Flipping through it, I saw a journey in pencil and ink: the station, the bench, the anger, the aching loneliness, the first glimmers of hope, the courtroom, the art camp, the map I'd once drawn of the world I dreamed of living in. On the last page, written in messy, slanted letters, was a phrase I barely remembered writing: "Maybe the home I need isn't a place, it's a path." I smiled, closed the book, and placed it in a box labeled "Keep," because now I knew that path was mine, and I was walking it no longer as the girl they abandoned, but as the woman they could never break. A year passed after Walter Carson's death, quietly, not with any grand transformation or sudden erasure of the past, but with a kind of gentle unfolding, like finally stepping into sunlight after years in shadow, not because the world had changed, but because I had walked far enough to feel its warmth again. I still had scars. They didn't vanish just because I confronted him. Healing doesn't grant amnesia, but those scars no longer defined me. They reminded me of who I had become and who I had saved. Not just the clients, but the girl I used to be. I bought my first home at 29, a modest brick townhome tucked into a leafy Boston neighborhood, just far enough from the city to be quiet but close enough to feel alive. It wasn't much by some people's standards: a small yard, creaky floorboards, old paint that needed love. But to me it was everything. No one could take it from me. No one could kick me out of it. No one could leave me waiting in it, wondering when they'd come back. It was mine, the day I moved in. Brian stood at the threshold holding a houseplant with a crooked little bow tied to it. Scout sniffed every corner like it was holy ground. We didn't toast with champagne or throw a party. We just sat on the floor, barefoot and tired, and let the silence mean something new, not absence, but peace. But my work at the Compass Project grew faster than I ever expected. We started with 5 clients that first year. By year 3, we were up to 60. We helped teens facing eviction after aging out of care. We trained volunteers to show up at court hearings so no child ever sat in the back row alone. We held workshops on renters' rights, credit literacy, and healing from trauma. I partnered with Cassandra on legislation aimed at making foster care reform real mandatory follow-ups after placement, better housing support, trauma-informed case management. And then one day, I was asked to testify. In D.C. before Congress? Me. The girl who once slept in a bunk bed with peeling paint and 2 plastic bags of belongings. I wore a navy blazer I borrowed from Cassandra and sat beneath the hot lights, reading from my prepared statement with steady hands and an unflinching voice. My name is Lila Carson. I was abandoned at 11 years old at a train station and spent 7 years in the child welfare system. Today, I'm an attorney advocating for youth like me, and I'm here to tell you the system didn't fail because people didn't care. It failed because the caring wasn't matched by accountability. Afterward, several lawmakers approached me privately. One told me that was the most honest thing I've heard all session. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a beginning, and that was enough. That Christmas, I hosted dinner in my new home, not for blood relatives, but for the people who had become my chosen family. Cassandra brought sweet potato casserole. Ms. Cho came with her teenage daughter and a batch of homemade spring rolls. Brian made his infamous garlic mashed potatoes. Scout trotted underfoot, nabbing crumbs like a seasoned pro. We ate, we laughed, we lit candles and told stories. We passed a tray of memory cards where everyone could write down something they were proud of that year. When it came to me, I hesitated. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because there was so much. I finally wrote, I didn't run away from who I was. I built something from it. Later that night, as dishes clinked in the sink and soft music played in the background, Ms. Cho found me standing by the window, looking out into the soft fall of snow. "You look settled," she said. "I think I am. I'm proud of you." My throat tightened. "You were the first person who ever said that to me. Back at Greenwood. I meant it then," she said. "And I mean it now." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sometime in the spring, I returned to the train station in Vermont. Not because I was haunted by it anymore, but because I wanted to see it with clear eyes. It hadn't changed much. The bench I was left on was still there, faded and dented. The platform was cracked. The ticket counter now had a self-service kiosk. I sat on the same bench and closed my eyes. I thought of the little girl who waited there with $5 and silence pressing against her like fog. She had no idea who she would become. She just knew she wouldn't stay broken. And I wanted to whisper to her, "You make it. It's hard and it's ugly and it's beautiful, but you make it." I didn't cry, not out of pride, not out of defiance, but because there were no tears left for that chapter. I had already turned the page. A few weeks later, I got a message from a former client, Jade, now 18, newly accepted into a community college program and renting her first apartment. Her message read, "Ms. Carson, I didn't think I'd survive foster care, but I did. You believed in me when no one else did. I want to be like you one day. Not a lawyer, just someone who stays." It hit me harder than I expected. Someone who stays. That had always been the dream. Hadn't it, to become someone solid, not perfect, not untouchable, but present? The opposite of abandonment is not revenge. It's presence. It's choosing to remain even when leaving would be easier. I stood in my kitchen that night, phone in one hand, Scout curled at my feet, and I realized this was the ending I never thought I'd get, not because my past had been erased, but because it no longer dictated where I went next. I would never be the girl waiting on that bench again. I was the woman walking away from it with her head high, her voice strong, and her path lit not by what she left behind, but by everything she had built from it.